Vision had a plan from the start. Your son for redemption, the price for my heart. And I don't have a context for that kind of love. I don't understand, I can't comprehend. All I know is I need you. I run to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, oh. I run to the Father, roll into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart found a surgeon, soul found a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart found a surgeon, my soul found a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again.
Awesome. Please be seated. That was beautiful. Oh, it's really nice to see everyone tonight. Some new faces. Hope everyone's doing well. Today we're actually doubly blessed to have Sam and John lead the discussion. It's a pretty big topic, something that's quite relevant, and I guess confrontational to an extent, depending on how you look at it. So basically today they're going to guide us through the topic of Christianity against other belief systems, philosophies, religions of the world. Now, I don't know how much we're going to get through today, but they always do a pretty good job at getting through the content. Most of it, Sam has alluded to, will be discussion-based, so a lot of your input, questions, interaction will be obviously appreciated. And yeah, I'll ask John and Sam to come up to the front and lead us today. There's two handheld, and I'll get you a table as well. Do you want to?
Just to check, is it out of the question to sit on the floor in a circle? Is that illegal?
Okay, we did start late. So just it's 9 o'clock now. Okay, so we're gonna make an agreement. We'll aim at 9:45. If we need that extra 15 minutes, we're gonna do it. Okay, but just so that everyone understands that we did start late, that's why we might go over time a little bit. Okay, God bless you all.
No, keep that.
And we'll get Lydia if you don't.
So in my head, this was really going to be like, we're all going to be sitting in a circle, and it was all going to be very like, conversation based. And now here we are standing up, and you're standing, like sitting, and it's just,
It feels very talk based.
Yeah. So don't let that fool you. Like it's going to be a disaster if it is just talk based. You have to talk back. You must talk back. Especially because I had a lot of trouble understanding this topic. Like even like 5 minutes ago, I went up to Mario, I'm like, I think I've got it, but just tell me again, what did you want us to talk about? And thankfully, like our guess at what we were supposed to talk about matched about 95% to what he was saying. So hopefully that means that it matches to what you guys were asking, right? I hope. But the reason I'm making that point is if it doesn't, there's not really much point, right? So we're here to answer what we understand to have been like a discussion or a question that you guys had about how Christianity interacts with other worldviews. So the basic pitch that I got, right, was, all right, you're a Christian, but then you go to uni and there are non-Christians of many various kinds. There are Muslims and Buddhists and atheists and communists and socialists and capitalists and feminists even. There's all sorts of isms that aren't Christian. And so that can be quite confronting. So the question is, what do you do as a Christian? What does it mean to be a Christian in a setting where there are lots of people who share a very different worldview? So I think what we decided was that's a huge topic, right? So we're not going to go through every single one and discuss it. What we thought would be more useful is to go through the idea of a worldview. So Christianity is a worldview. It's a way of seeing the world, a way of being in the world. And all of these other things are also worldviews. And so the problem that we're having is what happens when all of these different or two different ways of seeing the world, or more than two, come together. How do you have discussions when someone sees the world in a completely different light to you? So that's basically what we're doing. But like I said, you have to, you must, it's imperative. Can people be banned from communion if they don't speak? Is that okay? All right, good. All right, that's full. We've got to go nuclear on this one. We really need your input. Because we want it to be relevant. We don't want to be talking into the air. Okay, so...
Yeah, so maybe one of the first things to try to elaborate on is just the idea of a worldview, right? And so if we can at least get this working definition down for the sake of the discussion, then that's something that we can stand on and move around with. So, and tell us if you disagree with the definition. Happy to hear that as well. So far we've said a worldview is a way of seeing the world, right? Worldview, way of seeing the world, right? That part seems okay. But as a consequence, it's also a way of acting and being in the world, right? It's something that therefore affects what you do and how you do things, right? So it's not simply an idea, it's sort of the lens through which you see everything and therefore act and interact with everything, right? So that's how we've understood a worldview. Agree, disagree? Yeah, okay. Awesome.
Peter can have communion next year. No one else. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Now, one other sort of thing we're going to tack on to that definition is the idea that when people share a particular worldview, very often what they share, if we were to try and break it down, what's in a worldview, what constitutes a worldview, it's certain practices and certain stories, certain narratives that inform what they do, and certain things that they do. So rituals, behaviors, activities, things like that. Incentive? How do you mean?
One can argue that an incentive of Christianity is simply to avoid the whole concept of hell. So can that play a role in the worldview?
Right, yeah, exactly. So that's actually a really, really nice thing, because that sort of touches on both. The idea of an incentive, where the incentive is to escape hell, that itself is a narrative, right? We're not sort of trying to make a point of saying the narrative is true or false. We're just saying that's a narrative that you've sort of taken in, and now based on that narrative, you decide to act or not act in certain ways, right? So yeah, perfectly, that's exactly it. Even your incentives, your values that you assign to, this action and this sort of thing, all of that fits into that worldview based on the narrative that you have and agree with or disagree with, right? And the consequences of that, your actions or whatever.
So let me just try and restate that point, because I think we've got to all be on the same page. So I think basically what we're saying is, right, so what makes up a worldview is you got stories plus practices that express the stories. So you just raised part of the Christian story, which is you have in your head human beings are born and then they live, and then depending on how they live, they either are punished or rewarded in the afterlife, right? And so that affects because you have that in your head, that's part of your story, that affects the way you act as a Christian. Make sense? We're all on the same page? So that's a very simple illustration.
Okay, and so in sort of keeping with that idea, we don't just want to talk about Christianity as a worldview, we want to try and understand other worldviews. So with that in mind, like we've got three examples of a worldview written down. But before we sort of go through our list, can you think of any worldviews that would have their own stories, that would have their own practices that you can think of besides Christianity? One easy way of maybe latching onto an answer to that question is think of groups, because very often a group defines themselves as the individuals that all sort of like believe, think about, follow along with a particular narrative, and they all participate in certain behaviors, right? And so if you can think of a group, see if you can tease apart what's their story? What's the story that they sort of identify with? What's the set of practices that they follow?
How about the KKK?
That was one of them.
Yeah. So, was that a plant? Like that was.
No.
Okay.
I planted other things with him. But
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. So let's go into that a bit more. Would you be able to pinpoint? Okay. So you've got. Sorry, you said KKK, yeah?
Of course.
Okay. So KKK. Give me a sort of narrative, like a sort of story that they believe, and a sort of practice.
So something along the lines of, someone with a fairer skin will have a sort of, like they'll be higher in the hierarchy of value, and like anyone on the lower ends should be punished because they're not of that stature.
Right.
Something along those lines.
Yeah, so there does seem to be a certain
something
like
that.
Understanding of superiority of a particular race, and based on that, like you said, yeah, like you can treat a lower race however you happen to feel so. All right, do people agree, disagree with that as an example of a worldview that has both a story and associated practices? Yeah? Okay.
What are some KKK practices?
Burning black people is one I thought of.
Yep.
Yeah, like the example's dark, like we're only going to give dark. Yeah, like it's not going
To be absolutely clear, no one approves of the KKK.
Yeah.
We're just discussing them as a,
as an example, yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking like burning crosses, like wearing white pointy hats, that sort of thing. But that was correct also. Yeah.
Yeah, also on their agenda is, yeah. Okay, cool. So we've got an example. Do we have a few other examples? It might help to really fill out the idea a bit better if we can pinpoint a few different examples.
So to be clear, it's groups that are bound together by stories and practices.
Would you say the Indigenous people?
The what people?
Indigenous, Aboriginal?
What the heck, man? Yes, we would. Okay, can you elaborate?
Like it really does feel a bit sus that it's like just this little group. And I've got exactly the things that we were about to say. We should have spread them out. Yeah. Okay, cool. So in terms of story and in terms of practices, would you be able to...
The stories are obviously the dream time, like how they believe the earth came into being and all the stories of the animals and everything.
Right.
And their practices would, like, obviously not now, but like back in the day, they would have like gone hunting and, like not wear clothes because they're like bound to the earth. And
Right, yeah, actually that's a really, really good example. That connection to the land based on the stories of the dream time. Yeah, definitely. Okay, any others? How many did we... Sorry? Yeah. In keeping with a few dark... No, it's a...
It's a really good one. No, but so can you say, Christine, like what narrative is... what's the story that they're operating on?
We've got to get some positive examples here.
If we're talking about like different types of groups, and we talk about the KKK, it's so loud. It would also be like ISIS, how they conform to this certain idea of their own type of Islam, and how they believe that if you're killing Christians or anyone that's not part of the religion, that it's right to kill them and stuff.
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. So again, there's a particular world, like vision of the world, vision of reality that then informs actions, right? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Maybe do we have time for one slightly more positive, like just to say that there's a spectrum of good and bad here.
Feminists.
Sorry.
Feminists.
Feminists? Yeah.
Positive
Positive.
Did you mean that as a... I'm remaining totally non-committal. I'm just...
Okay, so do you want to help us out with... No? Okay. But yeah, no, but you're right. Like, it's almost as though every group that you can identify, there seems to be... The thing that makes them a group is that they have a shared vision of the world and that they have shared practices, right? Yeah. No, definitely. I'm seeing a trend.
Positive is the good one. Like, negative is bad. I think maybe there was some sort of like...
Yeah.
No, but yeah, absolutely. And they do have a whole narrative about how the conspiracy came together to like...
Yeah.
Anyway, let's not talk about them too much because they're fun, but they're also... but yeah, absolutely. They have... Okay, cool.
So the only one that we had that wasn't mentioned, we were thinking was universities. So something like the big universities where there is a very pervasive, maybe not perfectly shared, but a very pervasive series of visions of the world. Materialism is usually one. Tend towards atheism, especially if you're in the sciences, things like that. They have their own practices, right? Like you're expected to behave in a certain way in a university and not behave in a certain way in a university. You have rituals like O Week and, we're sort of told that you're supposed to work hard, but then you sort of see that no one does. There's the graduation ceremonies. And how many of you have graduated and gone through the whole graduation ceremony? Wait, no one? No, yeah, we've got a few people. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this. Like, did it not strike you? Everyone's wearing this like particular vestment, and there's a procession up the aisle. Like,
it's very religious almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I mean, an important thing with universities is that it's not explicitly laid out to you, but in all like the promotional material, in all the advertising, there's a narrative about progress, usually, right? It's a very Western Enlightenment idea, but like the idea is that as human beings, as Western culture, we develop and we progress, and the way that we do that is through education and through knowledge, right? So if you look at, I just pulled off like the slogans for two, like Macquarie and UTS, right? Advancing knowledge. Macquarie's identified 5 research priorities: healthy people, resilient societies, prosperous economies, et cetera. They're trying to make the world better. And you as a student and as a researcher or whatever role you have within the university, you're contributing to that. And like John said, they've got vestments even, they've got rituals. So the point is that all of these that we've spoken about, they're all very, very different, completely, KKK, universities, all of them are worldviews, okay? They're groups of people and they're bound together by a particular set of narratives. And those narratives, they're not just stories, like they actually shape the way that people act. They shape the way that, like they give people incentives. They tell them what they have to do in order to be successful.
And it's an interesting point, but sort of like a tangential point to make, that the founding stories of a lot of these groups may or may not be true. But the distinction between historical fact and mythology sometimes can even get a bit blurred. So, for example, those in the physics and the maths know Newton sitting under an apple tree, apple hits him on the head. That's what sort of sparks off this whole vision of gravity and how to understand gravity, right? Did that happen? Did that not happen? Yeah, who knows, right? There are other things in terms of like the American founding fathers. I'm trying to remember who's the one with the
cherry tree.
Cherry tree.
Yeah, it was George Washington. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, which may or may not have happened. I forget the story.
It's like the. I mean, so there's lots of. So I mean, Newton is a good example. You've all heard that story, right? Like Newton sitting under a tree and an apple hits him on the head and it sparks the idea of gravity. So that's almost certainly not true. That almost certainly didn't happen. There's no reason to think that it did. But Newton really did discover gravity. And so, the fact that that's an important narrative within like physics, and it's sort of based on truth, but it's like, the
details may or may not be there.
It just helps because a lot of the stories that we're comparing between different groups, like some of them are historical, some of them are mythological. It just sort of helps to keep
some
that.
of them mix in between.
Yeah. Okay, but
Okay, cool. Are there any questions at this stage? Like, are we all good with the idea of a worldview? different worldviews. Okay, cool. Okay, so maybe one thing about the longevity of a worldview. So very often a worldview...
No.
Oh, no.
We'll get to it later. No,
Okay.
Sorry.
We should have practiced. Sorry. So one thing that you see very consistently between a lot of groups that have sort of lasted a long time, there's this tension between a dynamic, ever-changing series of stories and practices, and the stories and practices resisting the effects of time. They're not changing. They're traditional. They're passed down. They don't alter, right? Which is important. Like, both of those things are important. In one sense, in order for a group to exist through time, there needs to be something that brings people together as a group. What's the thing that brings people together as a group? If we're saying stories and practices, those stories and practices need to, at least in some way, stay somewhat constant over time. Otherwise, you've just got different groups in different times, right? But at the same time, we need some sort of adaptation to whatever's new, right? Like, before the internet and after the internet, think like the world is very, very different. And so all the groups that were sort of not there and then thereafter would have had to come to terms with the changing environment, right? They would have had to come to terms with what they do see now that they didn't see before, right? And so there's always this mix between what changes and what stays the same. Does that make sense? Okay.
To give an quick example, so one we discussed with, so I mean, no, don't do that. Ooh. So for example, right, so we were talking about the KKK and Nazis. And so, like, one way to be a Nazi, obviously, like the main way to be a Nazi was to be in Nazi Germany, where everything was actually happening. And so, for example, they had their whole narrative about the Aryan race, which we sort of spoke about. They also had like a set of rituals and practices, right? One of which is the salute, which someone almost did. Okay, so in one of in the black and white photo there, you can see Hitler doing it like in the original situation. Then, of course, like Nazi Germany gets destroyed, the Nazi government is dismantled. What happens to Nazism, right? If it is just like, if it has no capacity to adapt, then it would die out, which is what was the intention, what we would hope. But even in Australia, I have a cousin who actually has worked on some of this, and she's like, no, there's actually tons in Australia even. There are lots of neo-Nazi groups, and they don't look like Nazi soldiers. They're mostly, so have you heard of skinheads? Right, so it's sort of like a neo-Nazi movement, and like one of the rituals that they do is they sort of shave their heads. And so that other photo, the color photo there, those are Spanish skinheads, right? They've all got the short haircut, and they're doing the Hitler salute. They're not wearing a uniform. They don't have any connection to Germany. So they've lost a lot of the trappings of Nazism, but there's still a continuity. So we're trying to give like very consciously different examples, because we're going to see that Christianity works in a similar way. In the sense that lots of things can change, but there can still be a continuity, right? There's that tension between the adapting and changing based on the circumstances and the consistency that connects you to the past.
Okay, cool. Are we okay there? Questions, thoughts, worries? No? Okay.
So all of that is just like a theory of worldviews, right? Worldview is made of stories and practices. They can change within limits, but they have to have continuity if they're going to be consistent.
Okay. So with that sort of backing in mind, with that sort of background laid, let's think about the Christian worldview. Stories, practices, change and yet staying the same. Would you be able to try and pinpoint different parts of the Christian worldview, for example, different parts of the story that make Christians Christians, different parts of the practices that make Christians Christians? Would you be able to like tease that out?
Well, is it where there's the obvious one of like Jesus' birth, Jesus' death? That's like stories.
Right, yeah, the story of Jesus, the story of this man, Jesus. Yes, 100%. Massive, massive part of the story. If that's taken out, we don't have a group. Yeah, 100%. Okay, what else?
Passion Week.
Passion Week? Yeah. We go through so much of the Bible as like series of stories, like swathes of it, right? Like it's massive. If you actually go from like right at the beginning all the way to the end and listen to every single thing, yeah, like all stories, right?
And notice how the ritual in that case, like the rituals of Passion Week, they're connected to the story. So like every year we have a set of rituals that remind us of the story and like make us part of that story. Yeah, good.
All right, what else?
The creed is the story.
Yeah,
I really quite like that.
yeah. Like elaborate or not?
Like everything that isn't disposable or adaptable over time is in the creed. So that's what we've all agreed the story is.
Right, yeah. Like if you mess with this part of the story,
Yeah.
you've fundamentally messed with the story. Yeah. Like don't mess with this. Okay, cool.
I was just going to add creation.
Creation. Interesting. In what way? What aspects of creation?
I guess the beginning of
Like that there is a
yeah,
creation.
that there is
100%.
there is a God who created humanity
Yeah,
and
yeah.
earth.
Which notice is included in the creed.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the really one God who created heaven and earth.
Yeah, exactly. All right, good. So we're getting at like sort of founding story practices.
With the mass?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that was good.
No,
Good.
yeah, the
No
maths.
prompting. No. Yeah, right. Like everything we do in this space of a Sunday, or however many other days you do it. Yeah. Okay, so every day. Right. Yeah, like the liturgy itself, which is, in its sense, the union of story and practice. Right. Like the first half is called the what? The liturgy of the Word. Yeah. And then the liturgy of the believers, right? And you're a believer, right? You're in this group if you listen to these stories and you're like, yeah, keen. And then you do these things, right? It's almost absurdly, beautifully packaged for you to say, I agree with this stuff, I will do this stuff. And this is the Christian sort of worldview, right? Handed down beautifully in the liturgy. Okay, cool. Any other elements that you feel like you'd want to mention or you'd want to like not leave out? Not saying you have.
There's one other like important ritual that we probably should mention.
Like the Eucharist?
Yeah. I mean, we were including that kind of with liturgy, like one like.
You said it, baptism. Someone.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty important one, yeah. Because that's not one that, I guess we're doing very visually every single week. At least not us, right? Like Warner probably is, but yeah, like, before the liturgy, before everyone's, getting here. Yeah. He's dunking someone in the water. Yeah, okay, cool. And even in that act, it's not just the act, it's the narrative as well. It's, we give the creed, we baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We baptize into Jesus' death and resurrection. It's like we've taken the creed, put it in an action, and that's what we start off with. This is the beginning of the Christian life, right? It's, again, that worldview, that idea of narrative and action.
I was just going to also mention that the story that we've got of the Christ, it's hinged onto everything else that's come before it. So there's many other founding stories in the Old Testament that brings us to that finale that presents what it is for us.
Yeah, exactly. Like even part of the way that we understand the story of Christ, definitely hinges on the rest, All right, cool. Are there any questions, thoughts at that stage? We're doing okay? Yeah? All right, awesome.
Okay, so the question then becomes, right, so we've given like a theory of worldviews, we know what worldviews are, we've identified the fact that Christianity is a worldview, like the others. So the question's got to become then, what makes the Christian worldview special? Why should you want to belong to the Christian worldview as opposed to the others? And so, I mean, I think the simple answer, because it's not like there's no point like pretending as though Christianity is not a worldview among worldviews. It's one way of being a human being among many other alternatives, which you can't sort of, there probably were times in history and places in history where you could live your whole life and never meet someone with a different worldview. And that time for us is completely gone, right? That's just not an option now. You're going to meet lots and lots of different people with lots of different worldviews. So we're being forced to think about this in a much broader way. But in short, right, I think the key issue is if Christianity well, let me put it this way. Where did so we've given you a account of where the stories and practices come from. Of what the stories and practices are. Where did they come from? Why is it that Christians have the particular story, like the creed, and the particular practices that we do? Someone said the Bible? I think we're both slightly reluctant.
Yeah. You'd want to ask what part of the Bible, because at the beginning of the start of Christianity, we didn't have a Bible as such, like as we have it now, right? There wasn't even a New Testament at that point, so it wasn't specifically from the Bible as yet. Even before that, like what kicks off the oral tradition?
Can we say that prior to the New Testament, obviously they were referring, all the fathers in the New Testament are founding the story on the Old Testament. So we did have a Bible, but not the text of the New Testament as such in the way it is now, but all their stories are referred back to the scriptures.
The problem with that is that the Old Testament was there with the Jews. Unless every Jew becomes Christian, no, there's something that happened.
Yeah, the Old Testament doesn't make you a Christian, because Jews have it. What?
What was it?
But it's actually, I know, it's a really simple answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
it's very simple. It's really important.
What was that?
Could you say it a bit louder?
Can you say it louder again, please?
It's because God's come down and made himself known to us, the incarnation.
Right.
It's a really important detail, right?
Yeah.
A massive detail.
That's what kicks everything off. That's what kicks off the different way of reading the Old Testament, right? Because there is a different way that the Jews read the Old Testament and that Christians read the Old Testament, right? Like we've gone through that a few times at this church. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about, like even the way that we understand baptism, the way that we understand the Eucharist, the way that we understand the entire narrative changes with Christ, right? And from him, everything flows. Like, is that okay as a point? Like, does anyone want to clarify anything there? Like, that's a really, really important point.
Can we not? I don't know, because I think they were anchored in what it is of the Old Testament, but then you're right, absolutely. The coming of the Christ elaborates and magnifies everything thereafter, right?
Do you have Irenaeus, like the info? It's it might be worth sort of. I don't think I put it in here.
Yeah, I'll put that one here.
All right, so do you want to? Can you read it out?
Yeah.
Okay, because this is an important point, right? Like, what did Jesus bring that wasn't in the Old Testament?
Oh, okay. Let's see.
No pressure, John. There's no awkward silences or anything.
I know the book and the page number, but it's not.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you know the book and the page number. Yeah, that's great.
All right, give me a sec. Let me find it.
Maybe just a summary of.
Yeah.
Right.
Look, in short, it's the passage where Irenaeus says that the Old Testament, before the coming of Christ, what's the phrase he uses?
Was an enigma.
Yeah.
And obscurity to all men. But once Christ comes, he illuminates.
Of course.
Everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he uses the parable of the treasure hidden in the field. So the field is the Old Testament, and Christ is the treasure that's hidden within it.
Well, obviously, we will not be able to, I suppose, understand anything really of the Old Testament unless the Christ has come and illuminated it.
Exactly, yeah. So the point is that the Bible, like even the Old Testament, is not itself the thing. Without Christ, you can't actually get anything out of the Old Testament. Well, you kind of can. Like you can get sort of pointed in the direction, but you don't get the thing that you need, which is like the actual message of Christ. Yeah, I mean, the other point of that is like St. Athanasius talks about the Old Testament as like a mosaic, and he says that you can take the tiles in the mosaic and you can arrange them in any way that you want. So Arius takes them and he makes a particular picture. But if you don't have Christ, you don't know what to do with all the pieces. All right. So I think we have this sort of like...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if anyone therefore reads the scriptures in this way, he will find in them the word concerning Christ and a foreshadowing of the new calling. For Christ is a treasure hidden in the scriptures, for he was indicated by means of types and parables, which could not be understood by human beings prior to the consummation of those things which had been predicted, that is, the advent of the Lord. For every prophecy before its fulfillment is nothing but an enigma and ambiguity to human beings. But when the time has arrived and the prediction has come to pass, then it has an exact exposition or exegesis. That's Irenaeus against the heresies. So Irenaeus is saying, you read the Old Testament and you're trying to look for Jesus, you're not going to get it. And yet when Jesus comes, in light of his coming, you look back to the Old Testament, you then see Jesus coming.
Yeah.
Right?
That's clear, because that's the only reason we were reluctant when Michael said the Bible, which is a perfectly natural answer. Because it's a really important point that, especially as Orthodox, the Bible doesn't operate on its own. We often have this sort of idea that you can just pick up the Bible and there's Christianity. But you need Christ. Like, Christ is the reason that we're even reading the Bible in the first place, and he gives you the key to unlock it and to use it properly.
Is though is like, is that not speculation? Like, how come he can like sort of just create that assumption and create that? So like, what I suppose credence makes that more viable than, for example, someone who just like says, well, no, like a single I suppose other interpretation is just as valid. Like, what makes Saint Irenaeus or Saint Athanasius so much more, I suppose, like weighty in their assumptions?
See, this is a different question. I feel like we're gonna get drawn off worldviews. Can we? You said you only want half an hour.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
let's.
oh gosh.
Okay,
we've got half an hour. We do have half an hour left, so.
No.
No, don't apologize.
Let me just give a half an answer, and then we can discuss it outside. The resurrection, right? The resurrection itself is the reasoning, right? Because that's something that is both, like the way that it's usually understood. You read the Old Testament; it's a story half finished, right? You even get what's his name, Wittgenstein, atheistic sort of Jewish background philosopher, saying that he reads through the Old Testament and it doesn't have an end. It doesn't finish. So that there's a narrative that sort of runs but doesn't complete. And the understanding is usually Jesus is both the completion of that story but the unexpected completion of the story. We knew that there was an end of the story. We didn't know it was going to be this man who's not a priest, he's not like.
But
this
why
big
would you
sort
say
of
that when
king.
Isaiah says, unto us a son is given, unto us a child is born, and then he goes on to say that, he's the Prince of Peace and all that. So,
100%.
I don't understand that.
That's fine, that's fine. The part of the problem there is you would have had the Jews reading this and knowing this really, really well. The best example is St. Paul. St. Paul knew the scriptures well. He, like, inside out, right? Student at the feet of Gamaliel. And his reading of the Old Testament was, the Christians are wrong, persecute them.
Yeah, but you're right. As soon as the Christ appears,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, that's definitely true.
So
Absolutely.
it's not in the text itself. He never read that verse. He's like, oh, well, this is going to be, I'll be able to predict what he looks like when he comes.
I think it's in the text, but it's not understood until the Christ comes to illuminate it.
That's exactly what we're saying, right? It's there, it's locked, you don't get it. When Christ comes,
He's the key to
unlocks,
open.
then you see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So Christ plus the Bible gives you a good way of reading the Bible, right? Okay, cool.
We should get back to worldviews.
Okay. Talk after.
Yeah.
All right. Do you wanna-
Okay, so like just to sort of like reel back for a second, right? So the point is that the Christian worldview, the thing that makes it distinctive, is that the stories and the practices that constitute it come from Jesus. And if you're a Christian, you believe that, so it's a separate question which we're not addressing today, but like if you believe, for example, on the evidence of the resurrection and other reasons, if you want like, reasons to believe in Christianity, you'd want to do like an apologetics course or, come to apologetics meetings. That's a sort of separate topic. But if you're okay to accept the fact that Jesus is actually speaking for God, he's the Son of God, then the way of life and the way of being that he sets up is actually, it's like the user's manual, right? Like it's the story, it's the way of being in the world that is intended by the person who made the world. So that's the thing that sets it apart, right? It is a worldview among worldviews. It's a set of stories and practices, and there are many other stories and practices that you could belong to. But the reason that you would want to belong to this one is because this one is actually the way that the person who set up the whole story intended it to be done.
I like the idea of the user manual. The one who creates the world has then given you an instruction. This is how to be in the world.
This is how to be a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you're someone who, like, you know, when you get something from IKEA, you read the instructions.
Yeah.
You'd be a Christian.
Yes. So I had, we should read this because it's very cool. So, I mean, the point that Bola made was very important, which is, like, what is the main story that you get as a Christian, like the defining story? It's Christ. And the Old Testament stories, they come, like, they're only read in the light of Christ. And so what you get in, like, the Creed is the, like, definitive way of explaining it, based on lots of, fights about exactly how to phrase the story. But in the early church, there were many different, like, ways of, so, like, depending on what city you were, the thing that you received at baptism, we now say the Nicene Creed, but it could have been something, like, quite different. The content was the same, but they just phrased it really differently. And so there's a beautiful example that's given by Jaroslav Pelikan, who was an Orthodox theologian, and he talks about, so I think this was done by, like, Catholics, but Pelikan, like, really liked this as an example of, so remember we're talking about, like, the dynamism and the consistency, right? Cultures have to be able to, or worldviews have to be able to adapt and speak to different circumstances. So what happens when you go to a completely different culture? So we're leading now into what happens when you have different worldviews clashing with each other. So there's a tribe in Africa called the Maasai tribe. And when they were first evangelized by Catholic missionaries, they needed to come up with something with which to baptize people, like how are we going to pass on the story of Christ to people as we're welcoming them into the faith. They could do the Nicene Creed, but it's got all of these terms and, like, all these, light out of light, true light, co-essential with the Father, that have nothing to do with them, right? Those are fights that we fought in the East, and we say those things because we sort of had that struggle. And so, this is sort of like a blank slate. So that the creed that was eventually sort of, like, approved for use within their rite is called the Maasai Creed. And this Orthodox theologian sort of likes it as an example to sort of remind us of the core of the creed. Can you read it out?
Yeah. So we believe that God made good his promise by sending his son, Jesus Christ, a man in the flesh, a Jew by tribe, born poor in a little village, who left his home and was always on safari doing good, curing people by the power of God, teaching about God and man, showing the meaning of religion is love. He was rejected by his people, tortured and nailed hands and feet to a cross and died. He lay buried in the grave, but the hyenas did not touch him. And on the third day he rose from the grave. He ascended to the skies. He is the Lord.
So it's the same story. It's exactly the same story, but it's dressed very differently, right? And we would say in like Coptic liturgical language, he was incorrupt, right? His body was not touched by corruption. They would say the hyenas did not touch him. He wasn't dead to the point that his body started to decompose. We would say he went, like, traveling from village to village. They say he'd go on safari, which is also very cool, sort of thing. But the point is, right, the thing that always bound together Christians was the story, right? Like, it's the fact of this, and this is one of those, obviously, that is like a historical story. There's no, like, the fact that this happened, you can describe it in different ways, but the fact that this happened, the fact that this guy did these things, that's what starts off this worldview. Right. Okay, so we've come now to what happens when you take this worldview. We sort of got a preview of it with the Maasai Creed, but what happens when this worldview comes and meets lots of others, right? What happens when you encounter people with very different worldviews?
All right. So maybe it's worthwhile asking a question at this particular point. How many of you have had a discussion with someone who you would say, in light of this conversation that we're having now, has a different worldview to you, and you've had a clash over it? How many of you have had that conversation? I would imagine there aren't many who haven't had that conversation, right? Okay, how did it go? Like, how did the conversation go with someone who didn't share the same worldview as you? I mean, you all sort of laughed and were like, you know how it went. But, like, humour us.
I was just going to say, I think part of the complication with having a conversation with someone about that topic in particular is that you're having a conversation at a particular point in time, but your belief system has been built over X amount of years. And so to deconstruct 20 years of a belief system in a single conversation is quite pointless. So it's...
Sorry, just when you said deconstruct, do you mean yours or theirs?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, theirs. Well,
Okay.
without being egotistical.
Yeah, no.
You know what I'm
like,
saying?
just-
Like,
yeah,
it's just
understand.
sharing,
Yeah.
sharing the
Yeah, no, but you're right. Like, I can't fit however many years of Sunday school and every conversation with Tant and Amor and Abuna and like, how do I fit all of that? Here, have this. You're welcome. Like, yeah, no, it's difficult. Okay, cool.
To make things a bit interesting, the person I spoke to, and I vividly remember this, they were Christian. And they were like, if you believe what you believe, you're not a Christian. And I was like, okay, cool.
What,
So I didn't even speak to someone of a different faith.
what kind of Christian were they? Like
Baptist.
Okay, all right. So was it to do with like sacraments and you believe in...
No, it was like more evolution.
Oh, really? Oh, that's very interesting.
Guys,
Okay.
can we sort of not have side talks because it's sort of distracting the talk? Sorry.
I feel like that makes things a bit too complicated at the start. Like, can we let's just start with like completely different worldviews, like other religions,
Yeah.
or non-religion. Yeah.
I was going to say, it kind of goes two ways, and I think it both depends on your purpose and depends on what you're looking to get from it. Like, so either the conversations ends up being intractable, neither of you are willing to budge, acknowledge any ground, assume any common ground either. There's no way to have the conversation. You're talking at each other, you're not talking to each other. Or you have like a nice, reasonable conversation and you walk away both doubting a little and more secure. Like, it's strange, but you either feel more confident in what you believe and how you believe because you've thought it through and you've presented a good argument, or you can simultaneously walk away with that, like, a little seed of doubt that both makes you want to know your religion more, or or discover theirs, I guess. So it can go.
That was beautifully put.
Yeah, no, agreed. Like, and like for my own 2 cents worth, 100%. Like, some of the best conversations that have destabilized me completely have been with people who, like, completely disagree with everything that comes out of my mouth. And you're like, yeah, but okay, give me a sec, I've got to think about this, right? And then you have to actually go away and you're sitting there for months thinking and maybe I was just talking crap anyway. Yeah. So no, that's a really useful, valuable experience. Yeah, okay, cool. Anyone else? Anyone else able to, like, maybe tease out why those conversations don't always seem to go so smoothly? I mean, we had actually a few answers just there, but yeah.
Because if there's practices and ways of living associated with your worldview, a difference of opinion destabilizes the way that you live your life, which is really awkward because you're like, oh, the last 20 years, what have they been?
Right.
Yeah. So it's very threatening.
Yeah, it's not just an idea, right? Like, it's not like I'm sitting in chemistry and I don't care whether there's 2 or 3 electrons in a thing, and like it's not going to affect how I relate to my family and my loved ones. And yeah,
it can actually be quite an emotionally troubling experience. Like, we shouldn't ignore that. Like, it can be, especially like first few times, discovering that someone sees the world in a completely different way can be quite because it goes to the heart of the way that you like live and be. Yeah, which is why they also get quite heated often in the discussion too, right? Sorry, Chris, were you going to say something?
I was literally going to say exactly that. It's just like when you're talking to someone, you're both thinking that each other are wrong.
Yeah.
And
About
to do
like,
that
life
nicely is like you both want to wake each other up and say, like, snap out of it, like this is the truth. But it's hard to get that without being unsatisfied by the end of the conversation.
It's almost like you're talking different languages, right? Like, you're saying stuff, but it's not like they don't have a common vocabulary, so that you say something and it just means something completely different to them. Which can be quite troubling and, like, on the level of conversation, very frustrating, because it feels like there is no progress or communication even. Okay, that's good.
I think there are a couple of things that make the conversation good, even if 2 people disagree a lot. One is respect, which is I will not mock what you say is important to you, no matter what I think about it. And the other thing is actually listening, because I've found that some people listen actively and then reject. Some people don't listen. If they're not going to listen, you're wasting your time. So.
1,000%. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's good that there's a few people now who are picking up on those ideas of, like there's a reason why you have the conversation, and perhaps reasons why some shouldn't have those conversations, right? Or at some times we shouldn't have those conversations. Like if I'm crazy heated, maybe I shouldn't be having that conversation now, right? Yeah, 100%.
Sorry to be a pain, but we've got 15 minutes now.
Okay, no, that's...
Well, we can extend if you want, but it has to be your commitment.
Okay. Okay, so we said, right, that there's at least this sense of respect, which sort of leads into the whole idea of genuinely listening, right? Like you both mentioned that point of you actually have to not just be having two monologues at each other. It has to be a dialogue, which means you kind of have to be open to the idea that something you say is not 100% correct. Like you have to be open to the idea that someone in front of you may have an idea that is worth listening to, that is worth interacting with, right? Yeah, okay, definitely. Once, just say we have those things. Just say Sam and I disagree on something, we respect each other, we're willing to hear the other person in what they're saying. We're willing to listen and not just talk at. Is that now a guarantee that we're going to have a perfect conversation? Is there anything else that you think we need to like specify, elaborate on?
I would say you have to make it more fundamental than whether you're willing to listen or not. I think there has to be, you have to understand the purpose behind what you're doing. So if you're going in to convince someone else and you're willing to hear out their arguments and you're willing to build on yours, and like that can still be a very one-sided like debate, or not even a debate, you're again talking at them because you've gone in with the fundamental idea that although they may have something correct in the way that they think, you fundamentally have the ultimate truth or the ultimate like answer. So again, there's a kind of stiffness into going into an argument like with the intent to convince someone else. If you're going in to learn and to maybe correct yourself, then I think you have more of a chance. But it definitely comes down to the purpose of which you enter into the dialogue with them.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like, yeah, no, agreed.
Is it okay to agree to disagree as Christians?
Of course not. I'm just kidding.
I already said my question, but if anyone didn't hear me, I said, is it okay to agree to disagree as Christians? Because I get that it's okay to agree to disagree amongst other religions, but as Christians, or even as Orthodox Christians, is that okay to agree to disagree?
Can we throw the question back at you and ask you what you think?
I think it depends on what the topic is. If it's theologically wise,
like, could you give me an example where if me and you disagreed, like it wouldn't be an issue?
I don't know.
Like favorite hair color or something like that.
Yeah.
We could get out of that, right? Favorite
soccer team.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So as soon as we go outside the realm of like what's actually Christian, sure. What about inside the realm of Christianity? Would we be able to disagree on something and still somehow?
I think there should be some sort of unity. Do you want me to get closer? I think there just should be, like majority-wise, there should be some unity because in essence we are Orthodox Christians. We do assert to one group. We're not divided. So yes.
Right, yeah, there's some things that, yeah, if we just disagreed on everything, no, it's problematic.
Yeah.
Could you give us an example of something that if you disagreed on, you're starting to split the church?
The nature of Christ.
Right, yeah, 100%, right? Yeah, like as soon as you touch anything like almost around Christ, yeah, you're starting to touch the very core of the faith. Yeah, like people should start to be like, oh, maybe, we should have a better conversation and then just, yeah, okay. So there are some things we shouldn't disagree on.
Can I just, going on that, and what Catherine said earlier, if the objective of two people discussing, the objective is to come to a point where we sort of come to some kind of sweet location of we're all nice together now and everything is beautiful, the potential of that kind of dialogue may lead to diversion from what truth is. something else. And people can, going by that logic, can develop whatever ideologies they want to develop, so long as everyone is at peace.
No,
But,
I agree.
Yeah, so that obviously can then take away from what truth is.
Yeah, that's worth clarifying, because the point is never just to have agreement for the sake of agreement. There are some times where it's important to disagree. Like, if you were in Nazi Germany, you don't want to be like agreeing with the Nazis and seeing all the points of commonality. You might do that in an effort to bring the Nazi around. But if you're going to be like a decent human being, you have to be an anti-Nazi, right? You have to disagree and declare your disagreement. So I think that the point would be that the ultimate aim of any discussion, and when any two worldviews come together, which I think is what Catherine was saying, is the truth, right? It's not about winning. It's not about like making sure that your side wins, or that like vice versa. It's about coming to the actual truth of things. But the point would be that's the only kind of unity that you can have between two different worldviews that is genuine. Because even if you disagree about everything else, hopefully, if you're both honest, intellectually, like honest human beings, you both want to believe only true things. And on that basis, you can have a discussion.
Well, what is true?
What? Can't just find it. What do you mean?
What is true?
Are you asking like
I'm
general,
asking.
like
So two people can make up their own truth. What is truth?
Well, I mean,
how
but
do you
even
arrive at
that,
this truth?
No, but even that's sort of like part of the starting point of, can we both agree that there is truth, right?
Yes.
Because like you're saying, if two people can't agree that, like one says there is truth, the other says there isn't a truth, obviously the conversation's not going to head towards a truth.
No.
I mean, I think is the point you're raising, that you have to both agree that there is a truth and that we have ways of accessing it. And otherwise, we're not going to be able to have a conversation about it. Okay, so I think that obviously, I believe there is truth. And I believe the only way to arrive to that truth, no matter who we are, what culture, what we come from, is to get as close as possible to He who is truth, who reveals truth to me. So, but the point is that last part is not going to be common ground with whoever you're talking to.
No, but probably not.
But everything before that is. Like, before that, you can still have the discussion, right? Like, so then you have to have a discussion about how do you know that person you're talking about, I assume it was Jesus, is the truth, right? Like, how do you get to that? But, like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, before you get to that point, you can still have a discussion about, like, that's where you'd have, like, apologetics type discussions about, like, evidence for his resurrection or scientific evidence for the existence of God and that sort of thing. So you're not assuming anything in the discussion that they don't agree with, but you're leading towards a conclusion that would, like, justify your worldview.
Of course.
And so maybe it's sort of a weird point to end on, but it's worthwhile sort of making the point that there are some like fundamental ways of sharing ideas and progressing from them that we'd need to agree on before we have some sort of a fruitful conversation. So, for example, the point was made earlier, sharing common ground from which to progress, right? The idea of a shared starting point. Technical jargon, it's the axioms or first things. It's the things that are somehow self-evidently true that two people would agree on, and based on those self-evidently true things, you could then say, okay, if we both agree on this, do we both agree that that means this next thing and that next thing, and reason on from there, right? So maybe between me and another Christian, we can say we both believe in the scriptures, and based on our understanding of the scriptures, can we reason our way to the next thing? But between me and someone who's not Christian, I can't say we both self-evidently take the Bible for what it is, right? We'd have to take a step back and say, okay, do we both believe in truth, that there is a truth? Maybe we can get there, right? And so the starting point is somehow before, right? And that's something that you have to gauge in every conversation. That's not an easy thing to do. And knowing how many steps back to take, again, not an easy thing to do. But does that idea make sense? That finding common ground? Okay, cool.
Yeah, without compromising, like, because Abuna's point's important. It's not finding common ground by throwing out everything you believe. It's just like taking a few steps back into why you believe what you believe, to the point where you're still something, like you still have something in common with the person. Yeah.
Exactly.
Was there a hand up?
This might be too much, but like, what if the person you're speaking to is like, everyone's got their own truths?
Well, no, that's a perfectly valid point, and there are some worldviews which are incapable of discussion with other worldviews. Like the one that Abuna was talking about earlier, like relativism, like there is no truth. That's what there's no conversation. If someone's a complete like relativist, like there's nothing that's true, well then you can't, like if you can't answer that question, we can't have a conversation.
Which is basically what majority of the world is leading towards.
Yeah, unfortunately,
right?
I've noticed actually in like tutorials that like it's sort of changed over the years, but now like a lot of people genuinely believe that there is no such thing as like true, like especially like with morality.
And interestingly, the only thing that Jesus Christ tells Pilate when he's at that very moment of the judgment of his crucifixion or otherwise, and Pilate asks him, "Why did you come if you're a king?" The only thing he chooses to say is to bear witness to the truth. You know, and as if God, well, God knows, but he knows that this is the one thing that he needs to stand by and proclaim for mankind to be anchored to, lest we make our own truth and we perish in a way.
Although it's actually kind of an interesting thing. So you're saying in a lot of truths, you're finding people who like it's your own truth, and yet does anyone disagree with the flat earthers?
Yeah, a few of us.
You think they're wrong?
They don't believe Australia exists, so like it's pretty hard for Australians.
It's a null point for all of us. Yeah. But I mean, if anyone's disagreeing with them, perhaps you have a sense for truth, right? We're not the only ones. It's not like everyone who actually thinks that there is a truth is just in this room, right? There are a lot of people who say, no, there is at the very least scientific truth, right? We at least agree with that. So it's actually a really interesting thing, like depending on the spheres that you move in. There's...
Oh, no, that's true. And I mean, I suppose that like it's a sort of, but the second you start pushing at the relativism, it's like, but hold on, do you think racism is wrong? It's like, yeah, of course it's wrong. Yeah. But you just said that, you know, it's your own truth. Like, what if you're racist? I'm like, no, like that. Yeah, if like, your truth is that racism, then your truth is wrong. Yeah. Okay. So it's not complete. It's not been well thought out, I think is the...
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway. So we've got like 60 seconds. But maybe to wrap up, I think this was a... this is a nice point to sort of end on. So to sort of like be practical, I think so what we've kind of come to is that, and you know, there's more to talk about obviously, like so you don't have to agree with anything that we've said, but like I think what we sort of came up with as a recommendation for this problem is that if you're having like discussions based on different worldviews, the only way to have a productive discussion like about issues is to be able to do what we were saying, which can be quite confronting, quite difficult, which is to take a few steps back and think about why you believe what you believe, and take the discussion to the point of like truth, right? Is there a truth? How can we know it? To do that really well, you need to like read up on your faith. You need to read up on other faiths, you know, or like the belief system of the person that you're talking to. It's quite time consuming and like difficult. But like that's if you want to have the discussion, right? That's kind of what Ambasamwil is talking about here. So I mean, he's worth mentioning because I'm upset more and more that people don't know his story. So in a couple of weeks, it's going to be, you would remember him, Bruno, right? Did you? I
never actually met Ambasamwil, but yeah, I obviously, I lived through this era.
Yeah. So back in 1981, it's a very long story, but there were like tensions between the church and the Egyptian government. And they sort of ended when the president was killed. He was killed at a military parade, and like Islamists jump out and like fired into the crowd. So they killed the president, and Ambasamwil was sitting a few rows behind the president, and he was killed on the 6th of October. So it'll be 39 years next week. So he's been largely forgotten, but he was an amazing guy. He wrote a beautiful book called Life and Hope. And one of the things he talks about is how Christians, he wrote this in 1969, mind you, how Christians, Coptic Christians, should engage with other worldviews. And he says, very often limited ways of thinking enslave a person so that they can only think in one particular way. They're shackled to one limited way of thinking and cannot get free from it. They wall themselves up within the intellectual boundaries of one particular group or school of thought, or tribe or color or race or religion, and make judgments on every issue in advance before studying and examining it. And his point here is that this is, if your job is like going out and interacting with other worldviews, you can't go in with this attitude. Because if you can't understand the person that you're talking to, it doesn't mean that you agree with them. It's like Abuna was saying, it doesn't mean that you renounce what you believe, But if you can't see where they're coming from, then there's no place for you to have a conversation. So that's the sort of like, if you want to take the discussion route, it takes this, right? This is difficult. It's not for everyone. If you don't want to do it, like if it just makes you sort of emotionally troubled, which like we said is quite natural, then probably don't do it, right? Like that's not the way to, you won't be effective at it. You won't be, like the discussion will just be frustrating on both sides.
And it's worthwhile making a point that this is not somehow a new thing, right? Like this is St. Paul, this is St. Peter, right? Like if you go through Acts 2, St. Peter's speech to those who were there for Pentecost, he relies heavily on Scripture, but the thing that he's arguing is for a different way of reading Scripture based on the resurrection. He's speaking to those who agree with the Scriptures, but he's saying the way that you're using it can be altered. This is the thing that we need to have a discussion about because we both agree with the Scriptures. It's just how we deal with it. For Paul, when he goes to Athens and he's talking to the pagans, he's not saying, this is how you need to read Scripture. He goes, the temple of the unknown God, or the altar of the unknown God, and he says, the unknown God, the God that you worship without knowing, that's who I'm proclaiming to you. So he goes back to, okay, not Scripture, but at least a religious sense. And let's go with a religious sense. Go from that shared conviction forward, right? So that this is already, like early church. This is the way that they were thinking in order to be able to share the faith with those who don't share every single thought with them.
Which is what the church fathers did, sort of following on from Paul. So there's, if you want to look more into that, you were just saying you've been reading, there's a wonderful text by St. Basil called On the Right Use of Pagan Literature. And it's an essay written to like young students in St. Basil's time on how to read the books of pagans. So it's an alien religion, how to read them while maintaining your Christian faith. And like in some, if anyone knows the YouTube channel Be the Bee by a wonderful Greek Orthodox guy, it's really good. But he gets the title from this work because basically what Basil says is you've got to be like a bee. You go to every flower, which is every pagan writing, and you leave the stuff that is disconnected from the truth or that's evil. And whatever is allied to the truth, you take, right? Because truth is true whether it's within the church or without the church, right? It's the true, like what's true is always true. Are we going to like talk about it, or do you want to like? You're the one who said.
I think it really does depend on who you're speaking with. You're talking about St. Basil, and when we're speaking about St. Basil, this is a man of God who's completely immersed in truth. He knows who God is. So when he's traveling throughout different writings, he's capable of seeing what is associated with truth. By the same token, we see stories in the New Testament where people spoke truth, or even Satan speaks truth, and Christ shuts them down, or the apostles shut them down, lest the truth be mucked up with the lie.
Yeah, it's true.
I think to get to that kind of level, you really got to be very, very close to God. You have a very clear and good understanding with the Holy to be able to do that. So you'll be very cautious so you don't get confused with other philosophies in a way.
It obviously takes discernment, yeah. Like you have to do it wisely. But I think like it's important, like I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I just think that this is important because unlike in St. Basil's time, if you go to uni, you're going to be confronted with the other points of view anyway. So it's not like you have the option to, like the first option you're talking about, I feel like that's only going to work if you aren't exposed to the others. But if you're going to have these conversations anyway, why wouldn't you want to be like prepared, like learning? You want to be training yourself to be able to discern.
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to who he is. I mean,
yeah. This is going to be individual.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris is.
I was going to say, I think this sort of aligns with the idea of why Buddhism tends to be very pervasive in the Western culture, is because a lot of it aligns with the truth, but there's a few things missing, and I think that's why the West is so willing to accept Buddhism as a truth rather than Christianity, because some of them think that Christianity has had its day and it's so, wrapped with bad history and all the wars and whatnot, whereas this is a different, slightly distorted truth.
You get the spirituality without all the nasty stuff packaged in. Yeah.
You're very right, and unless you're founded and you know who Christ is and you understand that all that mess has nothing to do with him, you're capable to tell the difference.
No, and Abuna's point is like very well illustrated there, which is that when you take something that's true but you disconnect it from Christ, it no longer has the same, like fasting in and of itself, like Buddhist fast. And I'm not saying it doesn't do any good, but in and of itself, like even within Christianity, like even the Desert Fathers talk about how fasting can become an idol. Like the thing that makes fasting valuable is its connection to Christ. If it's done like on its own, it becomes like an activity in and of itself. So it can, like true things can become quite dangerous when they're like disconnected from the context. So that is important. Like I don't think Basil's disagreeing.
To be fair as well, there are other church fathers that completely rejected that kind of metric.
We didn't have time, but so, you know, that's one attitude.
Yeah.
Don't read heathen books, you don't need anything from them. But like in terms of numbers, just because the ones whose writings we have tended to be the ones that studied, they tend, like at pagan universities, they tended to be sort of on this side. But it's like you're saying, it's sort of individual, right? It depends on what your situation is, what level of like contact you have with other worldviews.
Yeah, so I think that's one of like the biggest problems. Like when we take that outside church, like we get threatened that our faith is wrong, and so in an effort we get really protective, like because again, like we said earlier, we base our whole life on it. Like it's a very subjective thing, but it's really important, like not to be like to go in with an open mind. Like there's a verse that says, "The truth like a lion, set it free, and it shall like defend itself." You shouldn't be like scared, like the truth is wrong.
That's so important.
It stands on its own. So it's when going like to having like conversation or a debate, you guys like the idea is meant to be like we're going to find the truth, even if it's like together. That should be like the basis, and then later you can unpack that.
That's a really beautiful point. Very powerful. I remember the Pope making. No, he was saying like so you have to. It was so. Do you know where the verse is from? Is it Proverbs? Like the truth is like a lion. So he's saying we often feel very like emotional when we hear our views being challenged and we want to defend them like aggressively. But he's saying if it's true, it has the power to defend itself. So that should take away the anger and the like anxiety from us. I remember Pope Tawadros making that point recently because he's having trouble with lots of people in Egypt who think that they're defending the faith by like, you know, slandering people and suing people in courts and things like that. And he made exactly that point. He's like, the truth, if it's true, it defends itself, right? You don't need to like sort of stand up and defend Christ like he's this defenseless, like poor damsel in distress. All you have to do is like witness to him, right? You have to witness to him and he can defend himself. Yeah, that's a really good point, Naji.
On that point, you were saying that if you take Christ away from the truth is no longer the truth. So if we view God as love, if we say the truth without love, which is that attitude, which is, no, I've got to defend it, and because I'm right, I don't have to be loving, you're no longer saying the truth. It turns into some twisted...
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've actually become a really dangerous thing because you're so close to the truth, but you don't have the actual like character of truth. The best analogy I heard, I think it was Saint, what's his name? Paisius he's a Greek saint from, he only died like 10 years ago, but he said it's like when people have like crowns that are made of diamond, but they fling them at people and like break people's noses with them. So, you know, you got a really good thing, but, you know, you have to use it properly. You can't,
Isn't there like a passage in the Bible where it talks about like if you have enough faith to move mountains, but you don't have love, you're nothing. Like it's the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So I mean, I suppose that it didn't come out clearly, but the point we wanted to end on was that if you really want to, you can do the sort of like the difficult intellectual job of like researching the other points of view, understanding, and that can be quite difficult. And Naji gives a really good point about how to do that, right? When you're researching, remember that the truth can defend itself. It's not all up to you. But aside from that, what every Christian can do is just be the worldview, right? Be someone who acts and speaks and relates to people in the way that Christ would, and actually like be the presence of Christ to people. And that will be 10 times more effective than, you know, a discussion would ever be, right? So... Okay, I think we're
good to finish there. If there are no questions, thoughts? All right, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Big thank you. Can you guys also say congratulations to John, because he just recently got married, so he's a married man. Oh, where is she? Hello, wifey. Congrats. I didn't see you there. You came late. No? I didn't see you. Good to see you. You live together? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Congratulations. God bless you both. Absolutely beautiful. I mean, thank you. And again, I remind you that we need to be so close to truth, to wisdom. He feeds us, He nourishes our spirits, and through Him we can go forth and be light to the world. Please be careful you don't go out to the world trying to speak about truth if you don't spend some time to ask God to bless you and to strengthen you and open your eyes so you're blessed by the truth and by who He is. It's so important because we need to be. That's why our fathers have taught us. St. Anthony and many others went to the wilderness and stuck so close to God, and through his nourishment by the Lord God, he was able to present to us Athanasius and many others. So God bless you and strengthen you in your journey to be witnesses for truth in the world. Maria will tell you about next week, I believe. Yes? And I'll just tell you quickly, because we are very late, Sunday is the Feast of the Cross. So we'll be celebrating the Feast of the Cross Saturday night, Saturday Eve, and Sunday morning, very early, 5:30 in the morning, there's going to be a service at St. Stephen's, followed by the liturgy and then the next liturgy. Here is going to be another service as well at 7:30 in Arabic though. It's a procession of the cross, and if you can't make it that early on Sunday morning, then you are welcome to come Saturday night to celebrate the procession of the Feast of the Cross then, okay? May its blessings be with you and guide you all the days of your life. Mary will tell you about next week.
Thanks, John and Sam. That was fantastic. We always appreciate your love and your passion for the topics that you bring to us, and I'm sure the youth also value it as well. Just for the next 2 weeks, next week is going to be a debate. We've got two teams, and the topic is going to be it is harder to get into heaven if you are rich, right? So we've got the two teams ready to go, and then that will be next week. The following week is Tamer Schnuder, and the topic that he'll be covering is how can a loving God be so mean? So that's really just a topic. It's going to be really interesting. We'd love to see all your faces here, and it's really good to see everyone tonight and enjoy afterwards having a bit of social time and getting to see each other again after the whole situation. So thank you again, and then we'll start off for prayer.
Okay. We'll just we will sing something small because we are just so I don't keep you too long. I'll bring it up from the screen. Thankfully, the screen is going to work, believe it or not. Hasten, O righteous, hasten, because it's the feast of the beautiful cross. Okay, let's do it. I will just use the, yeah, there's nothing else I can do except that. Doesn't matter. Ready? We'll just have to do with this. 1, 2, 3. Hasten, O righteous, hasten to Jerusalem of heaven. Eternal life is in there, and peace with our Savior, and peace with our Savior. And Nehru's memory of martyrs who were our Lord's adorers, now in peace with our Savior, now in peace with our Savior, now in power. Of Satan's voice we have no fear. We're in peace with our Savior. We're in peace with our Savior. We're in peace with our Savior. Righteous were our grandfathers, and Jesus was their crowner. They're in peace with our Savior. They're in peace with our Savior. They're in peace with our Savior. Heavenly Father, we glorify your holy and blessed name. We thank you, God, for all that you do for the life and for the goodness and for the benefit of mankind. We ask you, Lord, that you continually inspire our lives and to help us, Lord, to shine forth as your sons and daughters, bearing your truth, bearing your love, bearing your wisdom. I ask you, Lord, to please to grant us your mercy, that we may live under your love all the days of our life. Be with every single person before you. You know them each by his and her name. Help us, Lord, to be united with you in a way that is mysterious, that brings us joy and comfort and peace and meaning and value. Bless us, Lord, through the prayers of the Theotokos, Virgin St. Mary, and through the prayers of the saints and angels and archangels of this day. Hear us to pray thankfully. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, to be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not to temptation. Deliver us from evil. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, power and glory forever. Go in peace. Peace of Christ be with you. Good news is you are allowed to mingle outside, but please make sure you're not exceeding 20 persons per group. So sort of spread out, if you don't mind. So maximum 20 per group, okay? But you're allowed to mingle outside and hang out. God bless you. Love you all.